I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching Eagle News International. On today's headlines. Israel and the Palestinians are mired in their worst conflict in years, with Israel pounding the Gaza Strip with more airstrikes and artillery, and Hamas militants lobbing rockets into the Jewish state.
The pandemic is getting hotter.
President Duterte says the government might be forced to go full blast on COVID-19 in case the country faces a worst-case scenario. More than 120 people are missing after a huge storm sinks a vessel carrying workers for oil installations off India.
Ryan, Executive Director.
And the head of the World Health Organization warned that the global pandemic isn't over yet, despite high COVID vaccination rates in some countries. The battle between the Israeli military and the militant group Hamas has entered its second week. Despite growing calls for an end to the bombardment, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said late Monday that Israel would continue striking at the terrorist targets. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken urged Israel and Palestinians to protect civilians, especially children.
חי להמשיך להכות במטרות הטרור. צה"ל עושה זאת היטב. היום הוא חיסל עוד מפקד בכיר של הג'יהאד האסלאמי. פגענו ביחידה הימית של החמאס, וגם ממשיכים להכות בתווך התת-קרקעי במטרו של החמאס. ויש עוד מטרות. אנחנו נמשיך לפעול ככל שידרש כדי להשיב את השקט והביטחון לכל תושבי ישראל.
Further, we call on all parties to ensure the protection of civilians, especially children, to respect international humanitarian law, to protect medical facilities, protect media organizations, and protect UN facilities where civilians are desperately seeking shelter. And we are ready to lend support if the parties seek a ceasefire.
Israel launched its air campaign on the Gaza Strip on May 10 after the enclave's rulers, the Islamist group Hamas, fired rockets in response to unrest in Israeli-annexed East Jerusalem. In total, Israeli airstrikes have killed 212 Palestinians, including 61 children in Gaza, while rockets fired by Palestinian armed groups have killed 10 people in Israel, including a child, according to officials on both sides. Attacks against Israel from Gaza persisted even more, with the number of rockets fired by Hamas climbing now to 3,350 in the heaviest exchange of fire in years. Hamas has threatened more rocket strikes on Tel Aviv if bombing of residential areas doesn't stop. But Israel said its missile defense system has intercepted about 90% of them. Fighter jets hit what the Israeli military dubs the Metro, its term for Hamas's underground tunnels, which Israel has previously acknowledged run in part through civilian areas. Rockets were also fired at Israel from Lebanon, where protests against Israel's Gaza campaign have been held in the border area. Meanwhile, the United States has so far blocked the UN Security Council from issuing a statement on the conflict. But on a call on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, President Biden expressed his support for a ceasefire following calls for it in Congress. Now, yesterday, China voiced regret that the U.S. is blocking the UN Security Council statement on the Israeli-Palestinian violence as it urges greater international efforts to stop the bloodshed. Take a look.
Regrettably, simply because of the obstruction of one country, the Security Council hasn't been able to speak with one voice. We call upon the U.S. to shoulder its due responsibilities, take a just position, and, together with most of the international community, support the Security Council in easing the situation, rebuilding trust, and advancing political settlement.
The United States, the primary ally of Israel, delayed the Security Council session from last week and has shown little enthusiasm for a statement. President Joe Biden's administration said it's working behind the scenes and that a Security Council statement could backfire. Meanwhile, the Overseas Workers Welfare Administration, or OWA, said it is ready to assist overseas Filipino workers in Israel who are in need of emotional well-being support. Administrator Hans Leo Kakdak said assistance is being readied for workers in the host country who are experiencing trauma due to the conflict in the host country. Take a look.
Kasama po dyan ang physical and mental wellness ng mga OFWs that na assistance that we will provide. Sa ngayon, meron ng mga helplines, may mga hotlines ang POLO at OWA at Assistance to National Section ng Embassy kung saan pwedeng tumawag. Pwede pong makipag-usap, pwedeng magdulog doon ng hinaing o nararamdaman, karamdaman o saloobin ng ating mga OFWs. May makakausap po sila. And then yung ating malawakang physical and mental wellness assistance can be further enhanced and developed as the days go by. Pero sa ngayon kasi, as I mentioned, ang top of mind natin ngayon is the physical safety.
He also said they will provide more assistance to OFWs in the Jewish state once the situation there improves. There are 30,000 Filipinos working in Israel, majority of whom are caregivers. Meanwhile, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said U.S. President Joe Biden has bloody hands because of his support for Israel in the conflict in Gaza. The Turkish president made the comments during a nationally televised address. Take a look.
Osmanlı'nın yıkılışıyla barış ve huzur iklimini kaybeden pek çok coğrafya gibi Filistin toprakları da zulümle, acıyla, kanla yıkanıyor. Siz de buna destek veriyorsunuz. Siz kanlı ellerinizle bir tarih yazıyorsunuz. Bunu söylemeye bizleri mecbur ettiniz. Çünkü biz bu konularda çok daha fazla duramayız, durmayacağız.
The Turkish president's comments in a nationally televised address represented one of his strongest attacks on President Biden since his arrival in the White House in January. Erdogan had spent the past few months trying to mend relations with Washington and reaching out to other Western allies after a year of sharp disputes. President Erdogan has been waging a diplomatic campaign to impose sanctions and other punishments on Israel for a military offensive that has claimed the lives of more than 200 Palestinians since May 10. To India now, where at least 24 people were dead and almost 100 missing after a monster cyclone slammed into western India, compounding the country's woes as it battles a devastating coronavirus surge. Now, hundreds of thousands of people were left without power after Cyclone Tauktae hammered the Gujarat coast on Monday evening. Winds of up to 130 kilometers per hour smashed seafront windows and knocked over power lines and thousands of trees, blocking roads leading to affected areas, according to officials. The colossal swirling system is the latest of a growing number of increasingly severe storms in the Arabian Sea, blamed on climate change. A hotel owner in the town of Vanagar said, "I have never experienced such intensity in my life. It was pitch dark as power was cut off and winds were making a roaring sound, and it was scary." Now, the Indian Navy said one support vessel serving oil rigs that were walloped by 8-meter waves off Mumbai sank, and 96 of the 273 people who had been on board were missing. Elsewhere, Gujarat Chief Minister Vijay Rupani said 4 fresh casualties were reported, including a child crushed by a collapsing wall and an 80-year-old woman killed by a falling pole. He added that over 16,500 houses were damaged, 40,000 trees uprooted, and 2,400 villages without power. The deadly weather system hit just as India's healthcare system struggles with the coronavirus surge that in the past 24 hours killed a record 4,329. Mumbai shifted about 600 COVID patients from field hospitals to safer locations. Meanwhile, a climate expert said rapid ocean warming is behind the increase in storms forming in the Arabian Sea off the coast of western India. As Cyclone Tauktae, according to press reports, the biggest to hit western India in 30 years, pummels towards the state of Gujarat. Let's listen in.
One of the reasons that we are seeing more storms and cyclones in the tropical regions, especially regions like Arabian Sea and all, is because of ocean warming, rapid ocean warming. Storms and cyclones draw their energy from warm ocean waters. And now what is happening? The Arabian Sea temperatures, the ocean surface temperatures are warming rapidly. And that has resulted in this sudden spurt of storms and cyclones forming over the Arabian Sea in the recent decades. This is the fourth consecutive year when a cyclone has formed during the April-June season in the Arabian Sea region, and this might be the third one which is moving very close to the west coast for this season again, and that means we need to be better prepared for the west coast.
Last May, more than 110 people died after super cyclone Amphan ravaged eastern India and Bangladesh in the Bay of Bengal. The Arabian Sea previously experienced fewer severe cyclones than the Bay of Bengal, but rising water temperatures because of global warming was changing that. Meanwhile, India, the vast nation of 1.3 billion people, reported 4,100 deaths and 280,000 fresh COVID-19 cases in the past 24 hours, taking the total close to 25 million, a doubling since April 1. COVID-19 tests were administered to 200,000 people evacuated from coastal districts of the western state of Gujarat before the cyclone struck late on Monday, and efforts were being made to try to limit any spread of the infections. The organization said it was helping authorities to evacuate people most at risk in coastal areas, providing first aid, masks, and encouraging other critical COVID-19 prevention measures. Now, here in the country, President Duterte said the government might be forced to go full blast on COVID-19 in case the country faces a worst-case scenario. The president raised the possibility as he lamented that COVID-19 is becoming dangerous because of the discovery of more serious variants. Take a look.
The pandemic is getting hotter, and it's getting to be dangerous also because maraming variants naglabas ngayon, India, UK, Africa, and pag na-mutate ito, nag-iba ang anyo, we will have a problem now with discovering new vaccines. And we do not have a guarantee that the vaccines will be forthcoming on time, na walang maraming mamamatay. And if it is more a serious mutant variant, we'll just have to prepare for the worst. So, okay yung ating preparation. We continue to prepare and we calibrate our preparedness in accordance with its propagation. Kung medyo palapit na, at marami na tinatamaan, then we will go full blast in making everything operational. The COVID-19 is here, and it will take a lot of time before it will finally disappear, if at all. And with the advent of the new variants, it is good to prepare for a more serious attack.
Now, the Philippines has so far detected 12 cases of the B1617 SARS-CoV-2 variant that first appeared in India. And apart from the Indian COVID variant, the country has also reported the B117 from the United Kingdom, the B1351 from South Africa, and the P3 from here in the country. These are the variant cases so far. Meanwhile, the Philippines has breached the 3 million mark in its COVID-19 vaccination program. At the Palace Press Briefing on Tuesday, National Task Force Against COVID-19 Chief Implementer Secretary Carlito Galvez Jr. said that 3,114,847 doses have been administered nationwide since March 1. On May 15, the Philippines recorded the highest one-day utilization of 120,529 doses, and the government is now focusing on the immunization of residents of the National Capital Region, Bulacan, Laguna, Cavite, Rizal, Pampanga, and Batangas, as well as from Metro Cebu and Metro Davao. The inoculation of priority groups under categories A4, which is the government and other frontliners, and A5, the indigent, may begin in June once a steady supply is available. Now, the Philippines may have limited face-to-face classes for engineering and 3 more courses. The next possible programs that would be open for limited in-person classes are engineering, information technology, industrial technology, and maritime-related courses. That is according to Commission on Higher Education, or CHED Chairman J. Prospero de Vera III. This he said today, and he however, clarified that the resumption would still depend on the safety of students from the initial programs that were allowed to hold in-person learning. Now, he said initial data showed very positive results, citing 0 transmission in the first 1 to 2 months of face-to-face classes at Our Lady of Fatima University and the University of the Philippines College of Medicine. The official said engineering, IT courses, industrial technology, and maritime-related programs are being considered because these courses involve hands-on activities that cannot be delivered virtually. And to bring us up to date on the coronavirus situation in Taiwan, here's Kith Ong for the report.
After more than a year of Taiwan's successful battle against COVID-19, it now faces the greatest challenge of this pandemic after 3 consecutive days of increasing numbers of COVID-19 positive. After more than 4 months without a local case, the first highest local cases since then were recorded on Saturday, May 15, with a total number of 180, followed by another 206 local cases on Sunday, and the highest of all so far was 333 local cases recorded on Monday, plus 2 imported cases of both Filipinos who arrived in Taiwan at the end of April. Due to the rapid increase of local COVID cases, the Central Epidemic Command Center, or CECC, has raised the alert level to level 3 from May 17th that will last until May 28th. Level 3 restrictions include mandatory wearing face masks outdoors, of which whoever violates it will pay a maximum fine of 15,000 NT dollars. In addition, there is a ban on indoor activities with 5 people or more and 10 people or more for outdoor activities. Religious and social gatherings are also temporarily prohibited. The implementation of social distancing is also stricter, and the contact tracing system is more stringent. In contact tracing, the government would reveal the travel history of the COVID patient to alert the public. Businesses such as cinemas, spas, parlors, etc. should close if unable to comply with enforced government restrictions, and dining in restaurants is currently unavailable. The mayors of Taipei City and New Taipei City also announced on Monday the 2-week suspension of classes for the kindergarten, elementary, and high school levels. But school administrators have implemented an online learning system, with universities implementing the same. Many companies have already implemented a work-from-home system, while government employees were allowed flexible working hours. On Saturday, many Taiwanese went panic buying for fear that the situation might end up in a full lockdown. However, the Ministry of Economics immediately responded by limiting each consumer to 2 sets of noodles, tissue, rice, and other basic commodities. Taiwan President Tsai Ing-wen called on the people to abide by the restrictions in place and be patient during the 2-week partial lockdown to regain control of the situation. She also urged the people not to resort to panic buying because, according to her, Taiwan has more than enough supply of basic commodities. President Tsai also announced that Taiwan's locally developed vaccine is expected to be released to the public in July. So far, vaccination will continue in priority groups and other registered individuals while there is available current supply of AstraZeneca vaccine. The local government of Taipei City called on migrant workers, as well as those undocumented, especially those who went to the areas visited by COVID-positive patients, to take advantage of the free rapid screening test offered by the government to identify who have symptoms and be given appropriate treatment immediately. The entry of foreigners, including migrant workers from other countries, has also been temporarily suspended from May 19th. Only citizens, residents, and permanent residents of Taiwan can enter. So far, the total number of COVID cases in Taiwan as of May 17th is 2,017, with 1,123 already cured and only 12 deaths recorded since the pandemic started. From EBC Taiwan, I'm Keith Ong. We live in interesting times.
Thank you, Keith. Meanwhile, Singapore will close schools from today as authorities warned new coronavirus strains, such as the one first detected in India, were affecting more children. Taiwan also shut schools in the capital, Taipei, to control an outbreak, and the island banned all foreigners from entry or transit for a month unless they had a residency card. Now, both governments have been tightening restrictions to fight a recent rise in cases after remaining relatively unscathed during the pandemic compared with the rest of the world. Meanwhile, Singapore's Health Minister Ong Ye Kung, citing a conversation he had with the ministry's Director of Medical Services, Kenneth Mack, said Sunday that the B1617 strain, first detected in India, appears to affect children more. And to the U.S. now, where the New York City Marathon, the world's biggest 26.2-mile race, will return in November with 33,000 runners, according to Governor Andrew Cuomo. He announced this, that it will be its usual date, the first Sunday of November, which this year is the 7th after the 2020 edition was canceled because of the pandemic. Take a look.
The marathon is back. And that is a great, great New York event that excites people from all across the globe. There's a lot of great work for the city and the state of New York. Many people come. It'll be at 60% capacity, 33,000 runners. They'll have health and safety guidelines. Registration opens on June 8th. And again, the race isn't until November 7th.
The race through New York's 5 boroughs, starting in Staten Island and finishing in Manhattan's Central Park, typically has 55,000 runners. And the plan is to hold this year's marathon at 60% capacity, with registrations formally opening on June 8. And the race is one of the city's largest events. And its return will mark a watershed moment in New York's recovery from the pandemic. Organizers said 2021 will be a historic year for this event. Meanwhile, the head of the World Health Organization warned that the global pandemic isn't over yet, despite high COVID vaccination rates in some countries. Let's listen in.
Ryan, Executive Director for
For the second week in a row, there has been a global decline in cases and deaths from COVID-19. There is a huge disconnect growing where in some countries with the highest vaccination rates, there appears to be a mindset that the pandemic is over, while others are experiencing huge waves of infection. The situation in a number of countries continues to be very concerning. The pandemic is a long way far from over, and it will not be over anywhere until it's over everywhere.
Now, Dr. Tedros' comments came 4 days after the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention updated its public health guidance to say that fully vaccinated people no longer need to wear a face mask or stay 6 feet away from others in most settings, whether outdoors or indoors. It's the first time the federal government has encouraged people to stop wearing masks since the agency first called for face coverings more than a year ago. And Eagle News will be right back after this short break.
Protect yourself and loved ones. Use Protect Plus Gold, a broad-spectrum disinfectant that kills 500 strains of bacteria, fungi, and viruses such as coronavirus and other disease-causing microorganisms. Also potent against viruses in pets. It kills 99.9% of disease-causing germs and works in 10 minutes. Dissolve 1 teaspoon in 1 liter of water. Apply on areas for disinfection or use it for misting. Protect Plus Gold.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Welcome back. One of China's tallest skyscrapers was evacuated today after it began to shake, sending panicked shoppers scampering to safety in the southern city of Shenzhen. Take a look. The near 300-meter or 980 feet high Seg Plaza inexplicably began to shake at around 1 p.m., prompting an evacuation of people inside while pedestrians looked on open-mouthed from the streets outside. The building was sealed shut as of 2:40 in the afternoon, according to local media reports. Completed in 2000, the tower is home to a major electronics market, as well as various offices in the downtown of one of China's fastest-growing cities. Emergency management officials are investigating what caused the tower in Shenzhen's Fujian district to wobble, according to a post on the Twitter-like Weibo platform. Now, the district said in a later statement that everyone inside had been safely evacuated and that experts had found no cracks in the ground surrounding the building and no pieces of outer wall had fallen or been damaged. In other news, a train derailment and subsequent fire prompted evacuations in northwest Iowa due to concerns over the train's cargo of ammonium nitrate. An 8-kilometer radius around the derailment site of 47 train cars was evacuated, and a community hall was made available for evacuees. Take a look. Now back here in the country, the ongoing maritime row between the Philippines and China, Malacanang said, will not hinder plan to possibly hold a joint exploration for oil and gas resources in the disputed West Philippine Sea. Let's listen in.
kaya nga meron pong usapin na habang hindi pa nare-resolba kung sino ang merong soberenya dyan sa areas na yan, baka posible na joint ang magiging exploration and exploitation. No? So patuloy pa yung usapin na yan dahil sa iba't ibang parte naman ng daigdig, itong mga issue na ito ay hindi naging hadlang para makinabang ang lahat sa tanging yaman. Sa katunayan po, yung langis sa Middle East, sa ilalim naman po ng lupa, wala naman pong territorial boundaries yan. No? So nagkakaroon po sila ng usapin kung paano jointly madidevelop ang tinatawag na straddling resources. At pagdating po sa joint exploration sa karagatan, marami na po tayong mga model na pwedeng sundin dyan at nakikita po natin na po pwede naman pong pag-usapan ang mga bagay-bagay na ito sa panig ng mga magkapitbahay na matalik na magkaibigan.
Now, the Philippines and China signed a memorandum of understanding on joint oil exploration in the West Philippine Sea during the visit of Chinese President Xi Jinping in the Philippines in November of 2018. The MOU is the basis for the two governments to negotiate on an accelerated basis arrangement to facilitate oil and gas exploration and exploitation in relevant maritime areas consistent with applicable rules of international law. The two countries sought the joint exploitation of natural resources in the disputed waters under the proposed 60-40 sharing scheme. On July 12 of 2016, the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague, Netherlands, invalidated China's 9-dash line, a geographical marker Beijing invoked to assert its extensive claims in the strategic waters. The Duterte administration has stood pat on its policy to promote Philippine claims and entitlements, as well as manage and resolve disputes through peaceful means. In other news, Japanese, U.S. and French troops kicked off their first ever joint military drill in southwestern Japan as concerns rise over China's growing assertiveness in the region. Take a look.
I think it's important because it's another nation with different SOPs and tactics to share with those with us. It shows how various nations can work together for a common goal, for a common cause.
It is obviously very important for us because we need to be side by side with people who are sharing this part of the world.
我が国を取り巻く安全保障環境が厳しさを増している中、防衛省自衛隊はこれまでも米国や豪州との間で水陸両用作戦の訓練を積み重ね、自衛隊の島嶼防衛能力を維持強化してまいりました。
An Australian naval ship is also taking part in the week-long air, land, and sea exercises involving 300 ground troops from the three countries. It comes as Tokyo looks to deepen defense ties beyond its key U.S. ally and with eyes on Beijing's moves in the East and South China Seas. Japan has long said it feels threatened by China's vast military resources and territorial disputes. It's particularly concerned by Chinese activity around the Japanese-administered Senkaku Islands, which Beijing claims and calls the Diaoyus. France has strategic interests in the Indo-Pacific, including territories like Reunion in the Indian Ocean and French Polynesia in the South Pacific. The nation unveiled its own Indo-Pacific strategy in 2018, describing Japan, Australia, India, and the U.S. as key strategic partners in the region. In other news, a UN General Assembly meeting set for today to discuss a non-binding resolution on halting arms transfers to Myanmar was postponed indefinitely because there was not enough support to pass the text, according to diplomatic sources on Monday. The authors did not have the support they expected in order to pass the motion with a large majority of the Assembly's 193-member countries, according to one diplomat, on condition of anonymity. Another source told AFP that they wanted more time for negotiations, especially with the ASEAN nations. The resolution, which would have been non-binding but politically powerful, called for the immediate suspension of the direct and indirect supply, sale, or transfer of all weapons, munitions, and other military-related equipment to Myanmar. It asked for military authorities in Myanmar, which took control of government operations in a coup in February 1, to end the state of emergency and and to immediately stop all violence against peaceful demonstrators. It also demanded that the military immediately and unconditionally release President Win Myint, State Councilor Aung San Suu Kyi, and other politicians under arbitrary detention. The resolution also called on Myanmar to swiftly implement a consensus plan to restore democracy that was reached at an April ASEAN meeting and to allow a visit from a UN representative, which has so far been blocked. Finally, the draft resolution called for safe and unimpeded humanitarian access. In other stories making headlines around the world, Hong Kong is temporarily shutting its representative office in Taiwan, according to officials today, in the latest indication of strained ties. Hong Kong's government didn't give a reason for the closure. Hong Kong abides by authoritarian China's view that democratic self-ruled Taiwan is part of its territory and must be seized one day by force if necessary. Like Beijing, Hong Kong doesn't recognize Taiwanese authorities as legitimate. Taiwan has an equivalent office in Hong Kong, but the offices have been caught up in souring relations between Taiwan and China. Taiwan has been public in recent years about how its officials have struggled to get visas. And earlier this month, Taiwan warned only 8 officials remained in the Hong Kong office, and their visas will only last until the end of the year. Taiwan's democratically elected leader, President Tsai Ing-wen, has been supportive of Hong Kong's democracy movement, which was squashed by a sweeping clampdown on dissent. And Eagle News International will be right back. Stay tuned.
Innovation, digital disruption, globalization. Startups, micro, small, and medium enterprises, as well as large corporations, all face interesting challenges in the market today. Peek into the world of exciting opportunities and partnerships to drive growth with the latest business news and information. We are open for business. Your weekly dose of entrepreneurial inspiration to update you on the latest developments in the world of business. Get up close and personal with CEOs and thought leaders to help you discover valuable insights, sharpen your instincts for smart decision making with the latest markets and economic trends, disruptive ideas, global innovation, social entrepreneurship, and other leading-edge business ideas. Join the conversations to create a more vibrant environment for entrepreneurship. Catch Open for Business, from vision to action.
Welcome back. An official of the Philippine Economic Zone Authority, or PEZA, said the agency remains optimistic on investments from Japanese companies despite the coronavirus pandemic. In his personal social media account, PEZA Deputy Director General Tereso Panga shared that Japanese firms invested 716.22 billion pesos from 1995 to April this year, accounting for 27% of the total 2.63 trillion peso investment approvals in PEZA for the past 26 years. Panga said, quote, "When it comes to Ecozone FDI, or foreign direct investment, the Japanese have always been Ichiban, or number one investor of PEZA." He also said Japanese investments to the country can be further boosted by tapping more into the Philippine-Japan Economic Partnership Agreement, or PJEPA, to improve market access to Japan. Another prospect for the Philippines in getting more Japanese investors is the policy of the Japanese government to subsidize its China-based small and medium enterprises, or SMEs, and large export manufacturers to exit the Chinese market. In other business news, Japan's economy contracted 1.3% in the 3 months to March after the government reimposed coronavirus restrictions in major cities as infections surged, according to data today. The quarter-on-quarter fall came after the world's third largest economy grew for 2 quarters to December, but the expansion was stopped in its tracks by a winter increase in coronavirus cases. The government imposed new virus states of emergency in January in response, urging people to stay at home and calling for restaurants to close earlier. The figures released by the Cabinet Office shortly before markets opened showed private consumption fell 1.4%, following 2 quarters of expansion, reflecting slower spending in the services sector. Economists warned that the slowdown is likely to continue, with the government forced to impose a third state of emergency in several parts of the country, including economic engines Tokyo and Osaka earlier this month. And the famous rock formation of the Galapagos Islands, known as Darwin's Arch, has collapsed due to natural erosion, that according to the Ecuadorian Ministry of Environment. The ministry said its collapse was a consequence of natural erosion. And images distributed by officials show that only the 2 stone supporting columns remain. Now, the iconic arch is famed as a diving spot for underwater encounters with sea turtles, whale sharks, manta rays, and even dolphins. Diving website Scuba Diver Life said visitors on a diving boat witnessed the collapse just before midday local time on Monday, adding that no divers were harmed. The Galapagos Islands, some 600 miles off the coast of Ecuador, contain unique flora and fauna not seen anywhere else on Earth and are part of a biosphere reserve. Meanwhile, all future fossil fuel projects must be scrapped if the world is to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050 and to stand any chance of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, that according to the International Energy Agency. In a special report designed to inform negotiators at the critical COP26 climate summit in Glasgow in November, the IEA predicted a sharp decline in fossil fuel demand in the next 3 decades, as well as a 2040 deadline for the global energy sector to achieve carbon neutrality. The Paris-based think tank called for a rapid and vast ramping up of renewable energy investment and capacity, which bring gains in development, wealth, and human health. IEA Executive Director Fatih Birol said the roadmap outlined in the report showed that the path to global net zero by 2050 was narrow but still achievable, with annual additions of solar and wind power reaching 630 and 390 gigawatts respectively by 2030. The IEA said that investment in renewables could put global GDP 4% higher by 2050 than it would be based on current trends. Meanwhile, a German environmental startup company, Everwave, uses its trash collection boat to clean the Danube and other Balkan rivers and brings the waste to Belgrade, where the plastic is recycled into building material prototypes. Take a look.
And we're trying to find ways to use trash and turn it into upcycled materials. The particular project that we're doing with Ecoplastics is turning trash into eco-friendly, high-quality building materials. What I've done as a career during my life is I've been a very good mining engineer, and I've managed companies and I've done lots of mining operations all over the world, and this is my opportunity to pay back for the mining where we take things away from the earth.
And the machine that we're using it's made by me and my team 3 years ago, and it moves plastic with a screw through a pipe that is very hot, and the plastic melts in the pipe and it comes out really molten. And we pump the molten plastic into a mold, and it fills the mold and becomes a brick when it solidifies.
And the news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be right back. An exhibition of works by the anonymous artist Banksy is opening in London as easing COVID restrictions allow cultural events to restart. Take a look.
So what we've got here is we've got the largest collection of privately owned Banksy art. We've got over 90 pieces covering all aspects of Banksy's career. So we have a very large print collection. We also have a large number of canvases and also some ephemera. Banksy is often about the very subversive humour, you know, and so we've got some really, really good examples of that. Things like Peckham Rock, where he put a rock into the British Museum and it wasn't noticed for 3 or 4 days. So these works are all from private collections. It's very important to stress. So these aren't works, but these are public pieces which have been ripped from the walls, as it were. We have a large number of collectors who've let us use their pieces for this exhibition. Banksy, after he'd released his 2010 Oscar-nominated documentary Exit Through the Gift Shop, it was realised there was actually a band called Exit Through the Gift Shop. And in exchange for being able to use their name, Banksy gave them this massive, massive canvas, which forms the centrepiece of our exhibition, called Brace Yourself, and the band is actually now called Brace Yourself.
The unauthorized exhibition is made up of works in private hands and is criticized by the artist on his website. Organizers said it is an important opportunity for a wide audience to see iconic works which would otherwise not be on public display. The Art of Banksy Unauthorized Private Collection opens on Thursday, the 20th of May in London's Covent Garden district. And the Church of Christ, or the Iglesia ni Cristo, is extending a helping hand through the Felix Y. Manalo Foundation in various locations across Ontario and Quebec. We have our Eagle News correspondents on site to witness this act of giving. Take a look.
Poverty, a widespread issue in Canada, worsened by the pandemic. About 1 out of 7 individuals, or 5 million in Canada, live on the poverty line. With this, vulnerable groups such as people living with disabilities, single parents, elderly individuals, youth, and racialized communities are more susceptible. Unemployment, homelessness, the increase in mental illness, the need for food are among the effects brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic. According to Statistics Canada, in April, as public health measures increased or tightened due to the third wave of the pandemic, employment fell by 207,000, or minus 1.1%, and the unemployment rate rose 0.6 percentage points to 8.1%. In the city of Ottawa, the government and the public health unit worked hand in hand to decrease the number of cases of COVID-19. The shelters and community centers are getting the support they need from the city, from organizations, and volunteers. One such volunteer organization in Ottawa giving support to the city is the Felix Y. Manalo Foundation. The Felix Y. Manalo Foundation is the humanitarian arm of the Church of Christ. The members of the Church of Christ and volunteers of the foundation conducted their Aid to Humanity event supporting shelters in Ottawa such as Interval House, Matthew House, and Youth Services Center.
From the Church of Christ, we want to thank you so kindly on behalf of all of our young people who will benefit from these items. We have 2 emergency shelters for young people, 4 apartment buildings, but also we have locations all across Ottawa, not only shelters and housing programs, but also mental health support, justice services, and employment for young people. So these kits are going to go to our shelters and our housing programs for the young people there, because these are most needed items, not only during the pandemic, but always. And they're also items that sometimes are out of reach financially for our young clients. So thank you so much for thinking of others and caring for others. And we give you our gratitude right back and appreciate your support very much.
Reporting from Ottawa, Canada, this is Sabir Mufti. We live in interesting times.
Vulnerable communities in Gatineau continues to thrive in times of pandemic, with continuous lockdowns and stay-at-home order and changing in curfew orders. Shelters and community housing keep up on providing support to less privileged individuals and residents in need. One of the shelters in Gatineau, Quebec is Legitimi. Legitimi is a temporary accommodation center working with people facing challenges and difficulties related to social exclusion and homelessness. They offer support for people over 18 years old who find themselves temporarily or periodically without housing and without food. And they also provide psychological support necessary for recoveries who are in autonomy. It has been a year since the center caught on fire and displacing occupant residents. As the center rebuilds, they are still in need of support. The Felix Y. Manalo, a Unitarian arm of the Church of Christ, Iglesia ni Cristo, conduct their Aid for Humanity event in Quebec and visited the vicinity of the shelter to give support.
These are homeless people who need a place to go. These are people who need personal belongings when they need a place to stay and who need to be fed and listened to. I'm sure that receiving personal hygiene products and food will help people a lot. We also have another center conferred to us called La Haute, which does have other people who are in need of transport and basic needs. It will help and fill a lot of people. It will help people a lot and sometimes not enough to help everyone.
Members of the INC engaged in a robust set of celebrations promoting community spirit through purposeful acts of kindness. The COVID-19 pandemic has magnified systemic and long-standing inequalities. At the same time, it underscores the importance of community support. Being the social arm of the Church of Christ, the Felix Y. Manalo Foundation's significant work in providing services for people to lead healthy and productive lives is...
Well, we have care packages such as hygienic products and also some care packages in terms of food, canned goods, and we truly believe that this will help.
Reporting in Gatineau, Quebec, this is André Lachma. We live in an interesting time.
During the pandemic, the needs of community and city for volunteer assistance and social civic works have continued unabated and have increased for some areas exponentially. In Ottawa, the needs of Canadian Blood Services constantly need blood donors. According to the Canadian Blood Services, blood donations are essential during COVID-19 pandemic to support life-saving care for patients. To answer this call, the members of the Church of Christ or Iglesia ni Cristo in Ottawa conducted blood donation drive. Members that are eligible to be donors heed this call and gladly donated. In Halifax, Nova Scotia, the members of the Church of Christ conducted cleanup in the community where they belong.
I want to thank you for the good work that you do in our community on a regular basis.
I understand over the last year that it may have been more difficult to provide those volunteer services and contributions to our community, but I know that you still were out there trying to do your best despite very difficult circumstances with COVID in our community.
I'm very pleased to recognize the volunteering effort of the Felix Y. Manello Foundation, led by brother Eduardo V. Manello, for your dedication to supporting the community as part of the global humanitarian initiative, Aid to Humanity. The great work of Church of Christ members and volunteers supporting Canadian Blood Services through a blood donation drive, and supporting, of course, the most vulnerable members of our community by organizing donations of hygiene products, face masks, and more. Thank you for all your continued hard work in our community. Despite not being able to acknowledge you all in person, I'm proud to know that you have supported so many through a most difficult year. Keep up the great work and God bless. Merci beaucoup. À la prochaine.
In Ottawa, Canada, this is Melanie Ronquillo. We live in interesting times.
Thanks, guys. And that's it for tonight's broadcast. Thank you for joining us today. And at the end of the day, as I always say, there remains so much more to be grateful for. I'm Alma Angeles, and we live in interesting times. Good night.